This episode is brought to you by the Local Palate Cookbook Club. Once you become known as an expert on a certain topic, does that mean you're stuck in that lane for the rest of your career? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I am Molly Stevens, and today I'm here with my co-host, Kristin Donnelly. Hello, Kristin.
Hey, Molly.
So we talk about authority. You know, if you write a book, you're probably an authority on that topic, right?
Yep.
To become an authority, an expert, takes a certain amount of life experience, work, research, all of that. But does that mean you can only be an authority on one topic?
I've talked with people who have almost a certain amount of anxiety committing to one topic because they're afraid they'll become so known for something and then can never make this switch.
Right.
But I don't know. I think today's guest proves that, you can change. You can change your mind. Or not even change your mind, but you can shift your work with your interests.
I know my interests in life have changed.
Sure. Yeah.
Can you reflect that in your work? And yeah, so today's guest, Emiko Davies, is an Australian-Japanese food writer, photographer, cookbook author. She's based in Tuscany. She and her husband own a natural wine bar where, in addition to selling wine, they host cooking classes and workshops. And she's written 7 cookbooks.
Yeah, it's prolific.
Yeah, and the first 5 were about Italian cooking, but the most recent one, called The Japanese Pantry, From Sake to Soy, is her second Japanese cookbook.
Yeah, pretty cool.
And she is speaking to us from the wine bar. So, well, sorry that our listeners can't see, but it's this beautiful stone room that I'm sort of imagining myself going to and having a nice glass of natural wine.
Yeah. So if you hear a tiny bit of echoing, just imagine her in a gorgeous cavernous space.
Let's bring her on. Well, Emiko, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to talk to you about your new cookbook, The Japanese Pantry. But we want to go back a little bit because you're really known for these series of books about the Italian kitchen. So how does someone who's born in Australia with a Japanese mother, spent your adolescence in China, attended art school in New England, moved to Tuscany, and then becomes an expert cookbook author on Italian food?
Yeah, I think I had a very unusual journey to get here. This wasn't really my plan. When I came to Florence about 20 years ago, I actually came here to study art restoration. I've always loved food. I've always loved cooking. I've always loved writing, reading. I love history. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with Florence. And I think there's just something about Italy that when you come here, if you even like food a little bit, that aspect of life is amplified here. There's something about it. So it just kind of took over. The food, it became really the thing I became really obsessed by. And I eventually started writing a food blog. And in that blog, I decided to write about Tuscan food, how things actually were here, what we really ate, what the seasons were like. This was around 2010. I think at that time, I was also seeing a lot of, that in a lot of food writing about regional Italian food, that this was being sort of written by people who don't live in Italy, in English, obviously. And I could see that people didn't really understand what Tuscan food was or even what really regional food was. I'm talking back in 2010. Now I think people have some knowledge about what regional Italian food means. But yeah, 15 years ago, I would read all kinds of things about this Tuscan dish, which was absolutely nothing like anything you'd find in Tuscany. And so I started a food blog where I would write about those things, kind of diving into very, very old cookbooks, some from the 1800s, some even further back, so that I could tell the story, sort of explain the history behind those dishes and sort of explain why they are, in fact, those dishes. As I started this food blog, which originally I didn't even know how to make a blog, I was sort of learning as I went along. I was just doing it for fun. I was doing it for myself. I was working as an art restorer, had other job. Yeah, it just took over. the food, the history, that combination of sort of writing about the food and the history and telling those stories. After starting this blog, I realized, wow, this is what I really love doing.
How did you get that first book deal?
So it was kind of an email from a publisher going, hey, we've seen, you write about regional Italian food, and would you like to make a cookbook?
Nice.
I mean, that's amazing. I really, It was like a dream come true for me. I think it was because at that stage, this was about 2014. So I'd had the food blog for a few years. I was writing for Food 52 at the time. I had a column about regional Italian food, which I kept for about 4 years. That was a long-lasting column, which was great. So I'd had a little bit of exposure and a little bit of experience. I was writing weekly for Food 52, plus writing on my blog and writing for whoever would let me write for them. I mean, I was really enthusiastic at the time about getting as much experience as I could. Yeah, so I had this email and that was it. I was like, wow, yes, sign me up.
Of course.
Yeah.
Was that Hardy Grant?
That was Hardy Grant, yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Right. And that was Hardy Grant Australia, because we talk now there's Hardy Grant USA.
Yes.
And so we speak to many authors who are with the American Hardy Grant. And that first book was Florentine, I believe.
That's right, yes.
So your audience from the start is an Australian audience for that book, or?
I mean, the Australian audience is big. Australians love cookbooks. They love beautiful cookbooks, and they make lots and lots of really beautiful cookbooks.
Gorgeous cookbooks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a lot of enthusiasm from Australia, but we're also a really small population, so there's like 22 million or something in Australia. It's like a third of Italy. It's tiny. So I do think that the bigger audience is actually in the UK, which and now things have changed a lot, but Hardy Grant in 2014 had a big office in London. So they had a London office and a Melbourne office. And then I also had an audience in the States, because I do think Americans love Italian food.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yes.
And some people knew me from Food 52 at the time. And so, so sort of all across those sort of English-speaking countries.
You're in Italy, your publisher's in Australia, your audience is
all over.
All over, English speaking. I don't know what the question is. I mean, obviously you're not going to the office and meeting. I mean, nobody does that anymore. But is your agent based in Australia? How does this all?
I didn't have an agent because the publisher just contacted me directly.
Right, that makes sense.
I was, long distance. So everything was done by emails. We sent lots and lots of emails.
Contracts and all of that.
And being that my publishers are in Australia, my family are in Australia, I also tried to go home once a year or so to visit my family, so I could pop in to see the publishers in person whenever I was back. That was a plus.
Since then, I mean, you've had a pretty regular cadence of a cookbook coming out. So how does that all fit into your life?
Yeah, it was kind of surreal because I was actually finishing the edits to Florentine, and my husband got a job. He's a sommelier. He got a job as head sommelier on a beautiful resort in southern Tuscany on the coast.
Nice.
And so we moved to this new to me area. It's so far south that it's like a 3-hour drive to Florence, but only an hour and a half to Rome. So you're practically in Lazio. It's a really wild part of Tuscany on the sea. So, there's this whole new cuisine basically. And when I was there emailing, almost every day, my editor and my publisher, because we were finalizing the end part of finishing Florentine, how's the move? How's the new place? And I was like, I'm in this amazing place and the food is so different. And I just sort of describing it a little bit like that. And my publisher goes, well, I think you should write a book about it and do that now, while you're there, because we were only there for 6 months. I went, oh, okay. And so while I was still finishing the edits of Florentine, I started writing Acqua Cotta. So that came out very quickly after Florentine did, because I think at the time my publisher felt like there was an urgency to write that while I was actually there, living it and discovering it, trying all these new things. And so Acqua Cotta kind of came about almost by accident. It was like barely even a proposal. It was just like, oh, I'm doing this thing. And so that one came out very, very quickly afterwards. They came out a year apart. Yeah. And after that, yeah, I just kept, as soon as, the books were sort of finished and I said, well, I wanted to write about this thing now. I had so many different things I wanted to get out of me, and each of them have, their own little story and their own sort of the own way that they came out. But yeah, there was a lot in succession. There was Venice and there was Puglia and a family story about my in-laws who sort of moved from Puglia to northern Italy, Piemonte, and then ended up in Tuscany. And so I wrote about that and sort of wove that story in there, and they just kept coming out.
Wow. So you're talking about weaving things together. There's a through line of art through your life and your career. And so we really are interested about like the intersection of food and art in your work. And I mean, you do your own photography, there are illustrations throughout. So how does that all come together?
So I went to art school. I studied fine art, and it's also what brought me to Florence. So with Florentine, I really wanted to bring in some of that initial love, the first love that I had. The reason I live in Florence, the reason this book is now coming about is because of art. And so I wanted to sort of talk a bit about it in Florentine, partly just a little nod to that, this is what brought me here, but also because Florence is a city that, that people come to for the art. It's known for its art. It's kind of unavoidable. You can't talk about Florence without talking about, the Renaissance or the sculptures or the paintings. I mean, I wanted to mention artists throughout that book, and I did a lot of black and white film photography for Florentine. That was because when I decided to extend my stay in Florence, which eventually led me to living there till now, I changed my visa to a student visa by taking a darkroom photography class. And I did black and white photography for about a year. And so that was also like a little nod to, well, this is how I'm here. This is why I'm here. And so I included a lot of film photography actually I think in all of my books I have film photography. But yeah, it was sort of a little nod to that one thing that kind of started all of this.
When you say film photography, Emiko, you're distinguishing between digital and film?
Yes, yeah. I did all the location photos for all of my Italian books, and then basically since COVID also the food photos. But within the location photos, probably half of them are on film, were taken with a film camera, and the other half are digital.
Oh, wow, cool.
Yeah.
With the food photography part of it, how do you weave that into your process? Are you kind of like shooting as you go with the recipes, or are you more setting aside days to do multiple recipes at a time?
So it's a bit of both. With my first 3 books, I had the luxury of having a photographer, a food stylist, a home economist, an assistant, and we did all of those photographs in about 5 days, which is, not nonstop work over those 5 days, but you have a lot of hands, and there's this wonderful like creative process that happens when you're all together, sort of building each photograph. And I really love that personally because it's quite solitary otherwise, writing a cookbook. When it came to having to do my own food photos as well, yeah, having more sort of, you don't have that strict deadline or those 5 days, I sort of gave myself a little bit more time. And basically when I recipe test, I sort of always take a photo just in case, which does sort of lengthen the recipe testing process because I find myself always sort of setting something up and taking a quick photo. And then I would go back and kind of decide which dishes actually came out quite good when I did that just in case photos and which ones I needed to take, on their own. And then I would sort of schedule myself in for a couple of days where I would cook those specific dishes and photograph them. Yeah, so a little bit of both.
So the just in case photos I think of them as reference photos.
Yes.
I find them helpful. Like later, if I'm writing a head note or something, it can inspire me. But I'm really sort of struck by this film photography, especially given where you are. I'm assuming once it's developed and printed, then it becomes digital, so you can submit it.
Yes.
You're developing the film.
Yes.
But then you're turning it
and then
into
you have
a
to
digital.
Scan it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been using a service in, that they're getting less and less and less of them. But the closest and I think best quality one to me is actually in Valencia in Spain. So I send them my film and they send me back the digital photo. So they develop and scan
Oh,
them.
cool.
And they're great because they also ask for like references, like what kind of mood do you want, what kind of colors, because they have different scanners, different machines that kind of might be warmer or might be cooler. So that's been really interesting because I'm able to sort of tell them I want these to be a bit warmer or I want these to, to look like that. And I can send them references. They just scan them and send them back to me. But there's this really like slight difference between each of the scanners that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
I mean, I'm so old school, but I do love thinking that you still find value and you still like film photography, that it still offers something that you don't get from digital.
It does. And, when I first started my blog, that was one of the things that took me so long to start it in the beginning, because at the time I was really only taking photographs with film. And I thought, how am I going to have a blog? And, I'm going to have to do something with the film and then get it developed. The photos, I decided that it was all going to be too much trouble to keep up a weekly blog and that I'd have to just buy myself a digital camera and essentially teach myself how to use a digital camera, because it's really different. It's really different from using a film camera. I had to teach myself how to edit photos. It was a very, very new sort of place. Because at the time I was used to sort of developing photos myself and printing them in the dark room. It was a whole different thing, but it did make things easier, obviously, having the digital photos to begin with. I really love the idea of kind of having that nod to film photography throughout the books, aside from how they look, because I think aesthetically there is something very, very beautiful about a film photograph that isn't quite the same in a digital photo. So I love that. But I also wanted to kind of acknowledge I'm here because I extended my visa with a photography class and I still love that photography. And yeah, somehow I wanted that to kind of trail into the books a little bit, even if nobody else knew about it.
It's like your own little inside joke or something.
Exactly.
Right. Is it possible, to describe the difference for someone who might, you'd have to oversimplify, I'm sure, but I
feel like there's like a tactile quality to film photos. Like there's a graininess in them that you don't have with digital photos. And obviously now you can put filters on and everything like that. But even, I think even 10 years ago when I was making Florentine, there maybe weren't so many filters, that wasn't like a really common thing to add all this, like make it look like a film photo. But there's also a different quality of light. I think that's probably the main difference between a film photo and a digital photograph. The light is different, like the whites in the photograph are different. I feel like digital photos are generally sharper than film photos can be.
Yeah, there's almost like a dreamy quality.
It's dreamy, exactly. Yes. So in Aquacotta, for example, that one I really like. I even bought myself an underwater film camera so I could take the camera into the sea with me and take photographs, because I wanted that feeling of, when you're in the water and the waves are just, they're really close, they're at your face. And I didn't have the guts to take my camera into the water with me. So I bought a waterproof camera, like an underwater camera, so I could splash about in the water and take some photos to give that sense of this is where we are. We're in the sea.
Yeah.
Right. And the subtitle of that book is Tuscany's Secret Silver Coast.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Thank you to the Local Palette for supporting this episode. If you're a regular Everything Cookbooks listener, that probably means you really love cookbooks. So I want to tell you about the Local Palette Cookbook Club, a space that celebrates all things cookbooks. They have a digital library of exclusive author interviews, seasonal roundups, reviews, and of course, plenty of recipes. Members receive a weekly newsletter, discounts to their marketplace, access to events, and the chance to win cookbooks and kitchen swag. Membership also makes a great gift for your cookbook-loving friends and families, and there are several membership tiers to choose from. You can find more details by clicking on their link in our show notes. And don't forget to mention that Everything Cookbook sent you.
We've been talking a lot about your Italian cookbooks, but the last two have been about Japanese cooking, including your latest, The Japanese Pantry. So can you tell us about that shift?
Yes, so that shift started sort of stirring in me when I wrote Tortellini at Midnight, which came out in 2019. And that book was one I had been thinking about for a long time because I had been doing in the background. One of the other things I really love doing is researching family history. My husband and I married in 2008, and I kind of started this like family research. So it was sort of 10 years in all of this family research. I found it really interesting that his family were from southern Italy. Those family members, so his great-grandparents, then had moved to Turin for work. Like a lot of Southern Italians, they were moving everywhere else. They were moving to America. They were moving to Argentina. They were moving north to Italy. In the north, you had car factories and, places where there were actually lots of jobs. So they moved to northern Italy, and my husband's grandfather grew up as a Torinese, as somebody from Torino, but then met his grandmother who's from Tuscany, and eventually during the Second World War, they left Torino because it was heavily bombed, like many big cities were, and they moved back to her hometown, a small town in Tuscany. And so on their table, they had dishes that were from Piemonte and from Puglia, and my mother-in-law, who has never been anywhere, she didn't recognize that these were regional dishes. She said, "Oh, this is just, Nonna Anna's polpette. We make this for people when they come over and we want to give them something exotic and different." And I thought that was hilarious because I had been to Puglia, I had been to Piemonte, and she'd never left her town, her region. But she was cooking these dishes that, unbeknownst to her, had another regional identity that, someone had brought with them. And I love that idea of when you move somewhere, you bring your recipes with you and you cook those dishes that remind you of home, even if you never return. So the great-grandparents and their children, they never went back to Puglia. So that's why my mother-in-law didn't know about that these dishes were actually from Puglia or that they were from Piemonte. She'd never been. So I started researching this idea where I wanted to sort of weave in this family story and create 3 chapters in the book that were a time and a place. So the first chapter was Taranto, and it was the end of the 1800s. And then it moves into Torino, and that's sort of in the 1920s, and then to Tuscany in the 1940s during the start of the Second World War. Throughout the book, the stories of the family, like why they moved and how they met, just other sort of beautiful stories, beautiful things that I think are kind of special to read about, and not just because they're family members that I know, but also I wanted to sort of inspire other people to do the same sort of thing with their families, and sort of look at what's on their table and go, well, where are those dishes from? Because everybody carries something with them from wherever they go, wherever they come from. As I was writing this book, and doing all this, research where I was not only doing the background research of the family history, like we were visiting cemeteries to like look for, the names of people and the dates and kind of connect the dots. But also I was interviewing lots of family members about their memories of the food that they ate in the 40s and the 50s, or what they can remember their grandmothers cooking. And that part was, for me, I loved that part of researching this book. And as I was doing it, I thought, I really wish I could do this for my own family. I want to interview my mum and ask her, what does she remember my grandmother cooking? Because, I remember my grandmother cooking for me, but, probably in the 50s and the 60s, it was very different. So that was the beginning of me thinking about Gohan, and this would have been 2018. And I proposed it in 2019 after Tortellini at Midnight came out.
Gohan being the title of your first Japanese book. Yeah.
Yes, and I knew it was going to be that title because I wanted it to be about home cooking, what you eat at home, which in Japan is so different to what you eat in a restaurant and what you know of as Japanese food if you've only eaten in restaurants. I put forward this book that would have been, that essentially was what Gohan was, but it was turned down by my publishers in 2019. I think they wanted me to just continue writing it.
More Italy, right?
Exactly.
But instead of being deterred by that, you were like, well, I guess I'll find another
Yeah,
publisher.
I did. My first thought was I want to go back to Japan, and now I want to go and like interview my grandparents had passed away at that stage, but I wanted to interview my other family members like I had done at Tortellini Midnight. I wanted to talk to my aunts and uncles and cousins and see their food memories as well. But then COVID hit, and I thought I'll wait it out until I can get to Japan. And Japan was one of the last countries to open up again. They had very, very strict COVID rules. So I waited and waited. And in the end, I kind of got impatient. And by 2022, 3 years on, I'm going to just send this to another publisher. And I sent them the exact same proposal I had sent to my previous publisher. And they wrote back the same day and said, amazing, let's do this.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow. And at this point, did you have an agent already, or was that part of the process?
No, at this point, I didn't have an agent. I was still just me, and the publisher. And there was sort of a full circle moment here because actually Smith Street Books, who published my last 2 cookbooks, the 2 Japanese books, is actually run by Paul McNally, who was my first publisher who published Florentine at Hardy Grant.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So he left actually before Florentine had even finished. He left and opened his own independent publishing company, which became Smith Street Books. We had been in touch over the years here and there, and I just thought maybe Paul would do this. He has, a particular style, and he tends to publish books that he thinks are really interesting, and he has, I think, a lot of foresight as well. And so I was really happy that Paul was so keen to do it.
Gohan came out in 2023.
Yes.
And then your most recent book, which is why we have you here to talk about the Japanese Pantry. But in the introduction to the Japanese Pantry, you write that you were inspired to write this book after writing Gohan. Talk about that.
Yeah. So Gohan, I was really blown away by the reception that I got from writing Gohan. It seemed to, I don't know, people kind of connected to that book, even if Japanese isn't from their heritage, but sort of writing about your most sort of nostalgic food memories or connecting to your heritage wherever it is. But then the other thing I had a lot of feedback on was questions about ingredients.
Yeah.
And literally every other sort of comment was a question about ingredients. Where do I get these ingredients? How do I look for these good ingredients? Where do I, do you need
What
a lot
type
of ingredients?
Soy sauce?
Yeah. How do I keep them? I think a lot of people were so intimidated by cooking Japanese food because they've eaten in sushi places and think you need to be a master for 10 years at this or have knife skills or important, tools and things. And so I think they assumed you need lots and lots of ingredients and they're going to be really, really hard to get. And so that's what made me write. I thought, well, people are asking me all these questions about the ingredients. I obviously need to write about them. And one of the things I wanted to show people, which was also in Gohan, I wanted to show people that Japanese food, the home cooking, is really simple. You can throw it together when you're tired, when you don't have that much in the fridge. And one of the reasons you can do that is because you have a handful of really amazing pantry ingredients. You can honestly do it with a handful, even less than a handful sometimes. You can have 2 things, whatever seasonal thing you have in your fridge or at the market or wherever it is, you can really throw things together. So with the Japanese Pantry, I wanted people to sort of see this isn't like Ottolenghi's recipes that have, you've got to go out and buy like hundreds and hundreds of ingredients. You can literally have a handful of things. I ended up putting in 7 ingredients that I've called my essential 7 Japanese ingredients. But really, I think maybe 3 or 4 of those are the essentials and the others are kind of, if you have them, great. I hope that people will see through this better ways to use those ingredients when you do get them, but also to be less intimidated about cooking Japanese food.
Yeah. Yeah, you're definitely not kidding. I mean, like you'll see these recipe lists and they're very short, 3, 4, 5 ingredients. Just as you say, we were remarking that there were a couple of like kind of fun projects.
Yes.
Though.
Yeah.
Is it yubeshi, the fermented yuzu? Yeah.
Yubeshi, yeah, and that's not an easy one to do, but I was so blown away by this woman who showed me how to make it. She's in her 80s, Hama-san, and I went to visit her in the mountains of southern Nagano. It's quite remote. She lives in this little village above a river, backed by really dense forest. She's got monkeys in her trees, and she has lots and lots of yuzu trees. They have so much yuzu there. And this is one of the ways that they kind of preserve yuzu is by stuffing them with miso. And, you chop up some walnuts and other things and you put them in there, and then you boil them for hours, and then you essentially dry them out, and then you can slice them up.
For years.
For years, yes.
I think it's a 2-year recipe.
Yeah.
So cool.
I mean, miso is a really magic ingredient. If you have miso, you can live on that thing for years. It literally doesn't go bad. It just gets better.
Well, it's interesting because you also give us a recipe for homemade miso too.
Yes.
Which does take, I think it's a year or 6 months, depending.
Yeah.
You can start.
It's quick to make. If you can boil beans, you can make miso. That's how easy it is. But yeah, you need time before you can enjoy it. Yeah.
But those are certainly the outliers, because so many, Kristin and I were going through the book, and they're so approachable and simple and just really appealing. So simple.
I'm so glad.
We're curious about that organization around, you ended up with 7 ingredients, and it's soy and sake and miso, and you added more. Was it to make the book a complete book, or did you know from the start the chapters would be the ingredients?
I really felt like I could have done it with 5 chapters and then calling them, these are my essential Japanese ingredients. But then in the end, I wanted to add sesame and tea because if I'm being honest with myself, these are 2 of my very favorite pantry ingredients to have in my own personal pantry. So I thought, if I'm going to tell people these are my essentials, like this is what I love to cook, then I better put those things in there, because sesame, for example, I think you can easily make beautiful Japanese food without sesame. But personally, I love all things sesame. And in Japan, you use sesame paste, you use sesame oil, you use sesame seeds, black or golden or white sesame seeds. There's lots of different things you can do with them. All of those things are easy to find. Sesame paste, if you don't have Japanese sesame paste, you can use tahini. And I think a lot of people can get tahini now. Same with sesame oil and seeds. And I just think that extra little bit of sesame flavor for me is one of the best flavors ever that you can have on anything. You can transform even some steamed vegetables. If you have a splash of sesame oil and some salt, amazing. That's all you need.
Yeah. Oh, very warm flavor.
Yes.
You traveled to Japan for the book. I'm actually curious, just with the recipe development and testing, if that took place in Japan or in Italy or?
In Italy. So when I went to Japan, I took photographs and I took lots and lots of notes. I was taking notes everywhere on my phone, in my notebook, just on scraps, everywhere, whatever I had on me at the nearest, place, I would take notes. When I got home, I did all the recipe testing at home.
Got it. And how easy is it to find the Japanese ingredients where you are, or did you have to bring some in?
So, well, this is the thing. It's not that easy. I mean, I'm in Tuscany, which is you can't even get other regional foods here.
Yeah.
So I can get the basics. My supermarket, literally any supermarket in Tuscany will have, one kind of soy sauce, probably kikkoman, and then maybe, if you're lucky, miso soup packets, not actual miso paste, but the soup packets that have, bits of seaweed in them and everything else, which is why I ended up making homemade miso, because that's just a lot easier for me. And then what else can I get? I think I can get a sushi rice, but it's not proper sushi rice. I actually try and buy Japanese rice now that is imported. It's a huge difference. And yeah, so it's my ingredients are very minimal, very, very minimal. And so along with that, I would get, online from Milan, where there's a much bigger Japanese community, I could buy some sort of, some other ingredient. I could buy nice sake. I could get, proper mirin, not just the syrupy version, but like an actual mirin, it's made like sake, but it's made with glutinous rice. So it's like a sweet sake. So I could get, a few different ingredients. And then if I combined that with a visit to like a health food shop, in the health food shop, they tend to have things like seaweed, maybe also miso there, but I don't really like the miso that they have in the health food shops here in Italy. So again, I'd just be making my own. But I could collect, sort of 4 or 5 ingredients, things like sesame seeds or tahini, I can buy that. So I was sort of gathering, these little bits and pieces around and making do with what I have. And I think that that's pretty much also what my mother was doing when I was growing up in the 80s in, a small town in Australia where she had just moved from, near Tokyo. I think she was sort of doing the same thing, because now in Australia you can get so many wonderful Japanese ingredients. If you're in Melbourne, you're practically in Japan. They have all these wonderful Japanese grocery stores. But she was also making do with what she could get and recreating the dishes that she was used to eating, that her mother would make for us. And so I knew I could make, I could make something that tasted like home, that tasted like my grandmother's kitchen with the bare minimum.
You talk about in the introduction that your mother is the kind of cook who can just open up the refrigerator and make a meal.
Yes, she's great at that.
The structure of the book, it's so interesting the way you take these 7 ingredients, give us the history, give us some information about that, and then a handful, I didn't count, but how many recipes, each ingredient has recipes that use those ingredients. And they go across the range of types of foods, from sweets to mostly savory. But with all this information, I mean, your through line of research, your interest in history is across your career, clearly, and your research of traveling to Japan, as Kristin was talking about. And in the back, you give us further reading and historical references. But I was surprised there was no online shop or like where to buy these things.
Yes, yeah. That's something I would have actually really liked to include. I did it in my Venetian book, for example, and I had places that I researched and also reached out to my community. Do you have a place where you can buy stockfish, for example? And so right. I had gathered all this information that I put in the back of that book. And with the Japanese pantry, I thought about that as well, but I was way over my word limit.
Oh,
I had to cut out 30 pages from this.
Oh, wow.
And that was heartbreaking to me, because that's 30 pages of both recipes and writing that I had written, a lot more about certain ingredients or certain head notes and introductions. I had written a lot more, and I had to cut everything back.
Oh, I thought it was thought it was kind of smart, because it so depends on where you live. Everybody has different access, and yes, some people will need mail order, but I kind of liked it because it encouraged me to investigate my own markets and look what I could find.
That's right.
And maybe I'm missing things that are there because I'm just not looking, or learn to make my own miso or something.
Yes.
So I asked the question because I thought it was more deliberate than that. But also cutting, we all know the heartbreak of cutting. Words, carefully crafted sentences, research in your case, stories that you've gleaned from traveling to the trees with the monkeys, and recipes that people have tested for you. And that's, well...
Yeah, there was a story of I had been to an island where they make somen noodles, and these are the very, very, very thin, almost like angel hair pasta, very, very thin noodles, which I have a recipe for. And so I had all these photos of the hand-pulled noodles, and that all got cut.
Oh.
I have to ask about, there's this interesting intersection in this book, the merchant from Florence who, wrote about Japanese food in the 16th century or something. It's sort of a fascinating.
Yeah.
Yes. And it makes it so much your book, because who else could tell that story? But you also, there's a recipe. It's the last recipe in the book. It's the matcha maratosi.
Yes.
The cream buns, right? With anko. And I think it's the only truly hybrid recipe.
Right.
It's this Roman dish that you've made with your Japanese pantry ingredients. one, it's more of a project than a lot of the recipes, but I sort of love that you capped the book with this crazy Roman Japanese dish.
I know. I actually also in Gohan, I have one fusion dish, and my husband did not approve. It's a matcha tiramisu.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and well, he was like, well, you should no, that's a fusion dish. You should have a Japanese, But in my defense, I thought, well, honestly, when I see matcha tiramisu on a menu, I always order it. I love it.
Yeah.
And in Japan, you will find matcha tiramisu. In fact, Japan loves the fusion in desserts. So, they love taking, French patisserie or Italian desserts and putting Japanese flavors in them. And so this matcha maritozzi with anko, I didn't personally see that in Japan, but I imagined that this is something I would be able to find it, like it would fit in Japan.
In a fancy Japanese pastry.
Honestly, the first time I ate a maritozzo, I do remember thinking that this bun reminds me of anpan, which is the bread where the anko is inside, and it's like a milk bread, so it's very, very soft. And the first time I had that, I thought about anpan. And so, and this was maybe 20 years ago or something, but I think something of that kind of came back when I was thinking, what else could I do with matcha, and wouldn't it be delicious to make a matcha cream bun? And I thought, oh, maritozzi, perfect. Oh, I'm going to put anko in there too, because it reminds me of the anpan. And I think that people do know. I mean, you, as you said, you sort of see throughout the book that people know I live in Italy, and I'm kind of writing from Italy and referencing Italy here and there. So I think, the maritozzo with Japanese flavors, I am pretty sure you'll find it in Tokyo somewhere. Someone's doing something similar.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it makes it very you, though.
Yes.
I was looking at your newsletter on Substack, which I feel like is very you. There's like an eclectic nature to it.
It's a mix.
Yeah, I mean, you get to bring in culinary, history, sometimes politics.
Sometimes art.
Travel, art. Yeah. And it looks like you maintain a weekly cadence on that.
I do, yes. I send out every Monday morning, and I've managed to keep. For me, I need to keep a schedule. If I know that that's my deadline, then it keeps coming out, no matter what. And I did that with my blog too. My blog was weekly. I would post, every single week, and it's something that I would do for myself. Really have that routine. Yeah. To be writing weekly, yeah.
I guess Food 52 also, yes. That was a weekly column you said. So yeah, it just kind of got you in that practice.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, when I was thinking of, starting the newsletter and people have all these different suggestions, how often you should post, and the weekly thing, I think, came really naturally to me because I had already done it for my blog for Food 52, and I knew I could do it. I knew I could maintain it.
That makes sense.
Yeah. It's really, I just love hearing you talk about the arc of your career. And I haven't looked at your early books, but I'm imagining your voice has evolved over the course of 7 books.
Yes.
And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or if you know what's coming next, or anything you want to share.
I think my voice has evolved, and I think it's evolved from being more reporting on this thing and telling you about the history of Florence and how it relates to this dish, and kind of becoming a little bit more personal. Like Gohan and the Japanese pantry are by nature more personal because it's the first time I get to talk about the food that I grew up with and my family members. And so that became more personal. Some of them are a bit more like storytelling, like Tortellini at Midnight or Acqua Cotta. That one was, the subtitle is Recipes and Stories from the Tuscany Secret Coast, because there are lots of stories of the fishmonger, the fishermen, the people that I met when I lived there. So there's a bit of a mix, but I do think there is, yes, if you were to read them one after the other, I think you'd sort of see a difference. I think also a more confidence in both writing and also recipe, right? Like telling people what to do in a recipe or how to do that recipe. What's next? I'm not sure, but I have a publisher who is encouraging me to try writing fiction. So,
oh wow, Awesome.
Yeah.
Perhaps historical fiction.
Perhaps it's definitely going to be historical fiction because that's me. I think I'm really, really interested personally. I love reading historical fiction. Yes, that's definitely a story. I mean, there is a story that I've been interested in telling. It's about Italian history, really, and Italian food history. But as she was explaining to me, you'd reach a lot more of an audience if it was fiction.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I think, like a history, sort of a nonfiction food history book is quite, and it's about
Niche.
it's quite niche, very niche. Like, where is it going to be in a cookbook, in a cookbook section, in the history section? Where does this book go in a bookshop? So that's been sort of an interesting angle for me to start exploring now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Any advice you'd like to give somebody who's up and coming?
I think practicing writing and having something like a newsletter or a blog. People don't write blogs anymore, but maybe newsletter is the new blog, where you have, that deadline for yourself and you're doing it, on a regular basis. Even if you don't have many subscribers at the beginning, nobody did. Everyone started with one subscriber, right? Or none probably, and then built it up. Even if you don't have many people to write to, I think the practice of writing it on a regular basis is really, really important. For cookbooks, one thing I would say is there's always room for another voice. Don't be worried that somebody's going to turn you down because they don't want to hear about Japanese food. They want you to keep writing about Italian food. One of the things that I was told when that book was turned down was, well, they don't sell as well, was one thing, as Italian books. And the other thing was, well, we already have an author who writes about Japanese food. And I thought, you've got one author. You have an author who writes about Japanese. Is that enough? Think of how many Italian food writers there are, how many people write about Italian food. There's so many, and from so many different perspectives. And so I think don't let that one piece of feedback or one proposal being turned down, don't let that put you off. There's always room for another voice. You just need to find the person who believes in you and believes in your story, in your proposal. But I truly believe there's room for new voices all the time and different perspectives all the time.
That's wonderful advice to end on. And really, congratulations on this beautiful book. And thank you for sharing with us and for this book.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you today.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more about each episode, subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Here are other ways to support the show. Go to everythingcookbooks.com and check out our totes, t-shirts, sweatshirts, or other merch, or buy us a round of coffee. You can also leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Thank you to our editor, Abby Circatella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.